calendar. And David, I wanted to bring you on. We haven't talked in a while to discuss recent controversies around the ADL, the Anti Defamation League, and Elon Musk of Twitter X and his threat to sue the ADL, which he claims has been involved in trying to destroy his business, trying to get advertisers to boycott him in a very active attempt under the guise that he's allegedly has allowed anti-Semitism, I suppose is the accusation. Now, before we get into the details, and I know you're studying Musk, and you've done a pretty deep dive on this. I just want to clarify a particular issue with regard to my or any Jewish man or woman publicly criticizing another Jew or a Jewish organization, in this case, the ADL. We've talked about how the Talmud does not allow that. The Talmud discourages Jews from criticizing other Jews, even if they're involved possibly in crimes, because the idea is that it can damage the entire Jewish people. It could put us at risk. What I would say to that, and I've thought about this, is that I think the Talmud put those particular rules into the Talmud at a time when Judaism was at great risk. We had lost sovereignty in Judea. We had no country. We were basically living in other people's homes. And there was, there was great danger, and which often manifested itself. And I think there was concern that when you criticize other Jews or Jewish groups, you could put people in jeopardy. You could bring disrepute to the entire Jewish people. And that may even mean covering up genuine problems within the community. And I think that that particular idea seems to have gone by the wayside in 1948 with the establishment of the State of Israel, because once again, you have a Jewish commonwealth with a Jewish majority and a Jewish institutions and a Jewish army to defend the country. And so as a result, in Israel, this idea has gone back somewhat to normal in that you have Jews criticizing each other publicly, including Orthodox Jews, including very Orthodox Haredim. I mean, there's public criticism in the Knesset, there's public criticism in the media. And it's actually a very healthy thing, because if you have the ability to assert your own sovereignty in your own country, you don't have to worry as much about it, and you can engage in very important criticism that can lead to an improvement, a cleaning of the house, an attempt to prevent major corruption and immorality from setting in, because everything is out in the open and discussed within context. I mean, you don't want to go too far, and that even includes in America. We don't want to push. We want to criticize our politicians. We want to criticize our country, but you don't want to go too far. There's some sort of agreed upon social rules around that. Now, I would contend that that has translated into the United States. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I think that there are other Jews who agree with me on this, in that we are not, this isn't the Middle Ages where we're living in danger. Yes, there's anti-Semitism, and there's a rise in it, by the way, but a vigorous critique of our own people and of our own institutions, I think, actually goes toward not only improving our institutions and getting back to our mission as a people, but it also ultimately reduces anti-Semitism, because if you don't bring things out, then they get out, they end up falling into the hands of enemies, and they can be used in that capacity. So in that context, I am very critical of the Anti-Defamation League, and I am in agreement with Elon Musk. I think he should sue them. I think he should take them to the cleaners, because they have misused the concept of anti-Semitism to label anybody that disagrees with them an anti-Semite. And that's something that has not only cheapened the concept, but it runs against Jewish values. What say you, David?
Yeah, I mean, in the past, I've largely been almost always critical about the ADL, although in the last few weeks, I've been defensive of the ADL because of the higher media attention and people not knowing about the ADL and the popularity of Elon Musk and mean I've been defense like I, mean, I would say with you I agree that business wise, politics wise, I'm on Elon Musk's side, not the ADL. Politically, I'm not sure. I think the ADL does anything good in terms of strategy. Like I think all of their strategies are failing, counterproductive strategies. However, I don't think there's anything nefarious or bad about the ADL. I know almost all my local ADL leaders. I mean, my mother was a partner at the major law firm in Detroit, and one of her partners was the head of the ADL for years, and a lawyer. And I also think that the ADL. I mean, we could talk about this, and I think it's important. Of the ADL does factually through democratic processes largely speak for the majority of the American Jewish people that may have decreased from 40 years ago to today. It might just be over 50%, but with the President Eisenhower and the creation of the Conference of the Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations, besides for ultra Orthodox, every single Jewish organization I've ever been a part of has elections constantly. My local federation, they have elections. There's boards of director, the downtown synagogue, which God forbid, the new rabbi and the rabbi used a Rosh Hashanah sermon to talk about trans rights. That was her main message of her Rosh Hashanah sermon that I saw. But she won through democratic processes. It wasn't like their leadership wasn't usurped. It wasn't cabal. And the ADL largely represents Jewish people through democratic processes, and the issues that Jonathan Greenblatt is pushing is not because like he's rogue or bad, but because that's the issue that most Jews care about. And I think me and you, like I love Jewish people. I have compassion, and I just think they're wrong. I think it's counterproductive. And in this, I think Elon's going to win. Um, the Jewish community might keep on doubling down. There's going to be interesting. We talk about, Netanyahu and the role of Israelis. Like I read the the book, and it was funny. Just one quick thing from Walter Isaacson's book: when they fired Yoel Roth, he replaced him with another Israeli. I think Yoel Roth is actually Israeli, and the guy that he replaced him with was also Israeli.
Mm-hmm.
And Elon Musk is the levels of anti-Semitism to you. Like we got a lot of pushback. I never got any thanks for talking to counter-Semites. It's not the typical strategy that Jews employ, and it may never be. Like you were talking about, like the Meiser we've talked about when we were streaming weekly. Um, it's in some recordings the most serious of sins that like ratting out your fellow Jew to non-Jews. You could historically say why it was or what circumstance. Um, in modern days, like everyone's a Meister, everyone's going to authorities. It started, cracks like 10 years ago, God forbid. I think you mentioned the guy from New Square, the not all who go return or something like that, like about like child molestation, and where it used to be that in the ultra Orthodox, they didn't even want to report child molesters to public authorities. There was that they can't even do that. Netanyahu is publicly critiquing the people protesting him, and I mean, so there's a lot to talk about. I think just Netanyahu is making the same point, like the Holocaust, World War II, the March of Rabbis. Rabbi Eliezer Silver, and the hundreds of rabbis that came to the White House, and FDR ducks out because Stephen Weiss, Rabbi Weiss, says don't speak to those guys; they're troublemakers. And he might have been right to some extent; they were troublemakers. The head of the march, Rabbi Silver, had been suing conservative and reform Jews, like hundreds of lawsuits, largely about kosher standards or falsely labeling things, Jewish things that he considered, according to Orthodox standards, blatantly non-kosher kosher. But to the point where Rabbi Weiss told FDR, "Don't meet these rabbis; they're troublemakers." And the disarray during the Holocaust to President Eisenhower, 1956, says there's too many Jewish organizations saying different things. I need a unified voice, and that's the creation of the Conference of the Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. There's 51 members. The ADL is one of them, and the purpose of the ADL is to speak with a unified voice to law enforcement and politics. And if you want to go into it, although as a right-leaning person, I don't even think that is necessarily that positive, but in terms of on the local level, the ADL as the liaison to law enforcement that most people may not know unless they've had a dealing with. But if you get beat up, God forbid, or something bad happens, or as a businessman, if you open up a business and people try to shut down your business, or like anti-Semites, or you go to school and they try to force your kid to be part of the Christmas play, or don't want them to get off on the Jewish holidays, the ADL is designed as your one-stop shop with lawyers. Like I said, my mother's partner at her law firm was the head of the ADL. They're made up of lawyers, and they put up rewards. Like God forbid that case in Washington D.C. They found the guy dead, but there was the open reward for $10,000. Many cases, the ADL puts up rewards if you get beat up and you don't know what to do with how to deal with law enforcement. That's what it's there for, and that's probably why it has relatively such a good reputation on a local federation level with the Jewish people. And they also have a monopoly that's been negative because the ADL is the official liaison to local law enforcement. It solidifies their position as the official voice. It's like, God forbid, the liberal synagogue got a swatting on before Rosh Hashanah, and actually didn't affect the services. But if something happens, law enforcement's going to talk to your ADL liaisons, and you say, okay, maybe it's bad. Maybe I want to know this information. So I mean, there's a lot to dive into in terms of like what the ADL does, what the strategy. My prediction that the ADL will probably double down because they are factually speaking of the voice of the majority of American Jewish organizations, although that's decreasing. And then, what are right-wing Jews, what are independent Jews going to do about it? And Netanyahu in Israel is obviously Netanyahu meeting with Elon Musk and hardly even mentioning it.
Here's the thing, David. If the Jews want to, God forbid, support transgender surgeries or whatnot, then they should join Glesson, or they should join GLAD. Or if they want to, so wait a minute, David, I am not done speaking here. Okay. Let me just get a word in edgewise. The problem that I'm having here is that the ADL, by weighing in on these issues, and they are weighing in on them, including the issue of unlimited abortion, open borders, other political issues that have absolutely nothing to do with the covenant between God and Moses, that when they do that, they are carrying, at least implicitly, the imprimatur of speaking for the Jewish people, the American Jewish people, and for Judaism itself. And they don't. The point is that these are political issues that people can take a difference on, but to claim that these are a Jewish issue, which is what the ADL implies, that is a cause not only for anti-Semitism, but it's not really accurate. Judaism is not in favor of transgendered. It's not in favor of abortion on demand. It's not in favor of open borders. And if they want to go liberal and they want to go woke, or whatever you want to call it, then they really have to separate that from their function as a leader of the Jewish community. Now, on the issue of anti-Semitism, genuine anti-Semitism that you're talking about, like swatting synagogues and working with law enforcement, that's what they should be doing. I'm for that. That's exactly their function. They are there to identify genuine anti-Semitic threats to the Jewish community. They're also there, frankly, to support the state of Israel, regardless of who's in power. That's, in a sense, those are both basic Jewish values. But the problem with the ADL, from its very inception, and it's become more accentuated under the tutelage of Greenblatt, Jonathan Greenblatt, who is a former Obama official, is that they have become so obviously politically slanted to the left and to the Democratic Party, that they might as well be an appendage of the Democratic Party. And that not only does that not represent Judaism itself, because Judaism doesn't stand for a lot of the values that are in the secular realm, but it doesn't even necessarily represent the majority of the Jewish people. And even if it did, that they can form groups that, rather than try to claim they're speaking for Judaism, let them form another group. I mean, You and I have both heard people who are not predisposed toward Judaism. I'm not going to get into names. Say that abortion is a Jewish ritual. It's a Jewish rite because you get Jewish groups that claim that it is. First of all, that's not really true. They're not claiming it is. They may be in favor of a woman's right to choose an abortion, but they're not outright endorsing abortion itself. But even in that, even the idea of wading into that issue at all, they have to be very careful to make sure that their positions are consonant with Jewish tradition, Jewish law, Jewish understanding, and the Torah. And they're not. They're instead they're socialists. They're engaged in political positions that have little, if anything, at all to do with Judaism, but they're wrapping themselves in the Jewish flag when they do it. That's the problem I have. If they want to be pro-abortion, if they want to, any of these things, let them form a group that doesn't carry that imprimatur. It's inaccurate, and it's a slander against the Jewish people. I would say the same thing for people on the far right, by the way, if they want to get into something that's a right wing cause. It's not really the right venue for a Jewish organization to take that on. It's more of something in secular politics. So that's really my beef with the ADL.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot to mention in my, I guess my opening monologue, but that I mean, largely in agreement with you, and I would even say further that I think our corrupt leadership is a bigger threat to us than our supposed enemies. Even to, even anyone
Indeed.
but certainly in America, of like the names that the ADL is trying to get kicked off of social media, that our corrupt leadership is a much bigger threat than them. Let alone possibly in the Middle East. That might be a different story. Where actually have violent groups that have already in warfare. But I have to strongly disagree because I mean we've had this argument a bunch of times, and throw back to something like that's basically the same thing Notori Karta says in the Satmar about Israel, in that what's Israel have to do with Judaism, and has some to do. The question I constantly ask, usually rhetorically, is what is Judaism? Is Judaism what some books say or some rabbis say or what Jews do? And there's like no, the ADL is democratic, that the federation, the conference are all democratic. My local synagogue, like I tried to make a minyan at the synagogue for years and we hardly got a minyan, but they had tens of members that went to events, were more interested in social uh, activism, and they voted for this, and they wanted to do it as Jews. They didn't want to join a separate liberal organization. They wanted to join a synagogue that was non-Orthodox, that didn't really care about minyan or Torah study, but had a rabbi that was taking an active lead in social issues such as abortion and LGBT plus, and maybe labor and the whole liberal agenda. But that is what the Jewish community desired. They desired to get together as Jews to do political activism, and they voted on it. And the ADL is doing what the constituent members of Jews want the ADL to do. So if you're going to say, well, that's not Judaism, well, it may not be Judaism, the religion, but that is the will of still the majority of American Jews. That number is declining. Maybe from, like I said, like 40 years ago, that might have represented 75% of Americans. Now it maybe represents hardly more than 50%, but certainly, do you know any Jewish organization that doesn't have regular elections and polling, besides for the ultra orthodox? But like you're saying, the ADL, the Federation, synagogue, and I know because I lost. I mean, I didn't run; I wasn't part of the election, but I would have lost. I would have got 2 votes if I ran at the downtown synagogue. I would have got 2 votes, and like everyone would have been against me. And even I could have given your arguments, and they would have just laughed at me and all voted against me. And now they were the ones who are representing Judaism, and I'm the one that's not representative of Judaism. And I could say, well, I went to these schools, I studied these rabbis, I did what the books told me. But like, no, there's a community, and the community voted, and they said this is what's important to them as Jews, and that's what they're doing. And so he said, yeah, this is a disaster to maybe a spiritual situation. And it's, it's kind of nice for you to just say that that's not really Judaism. And I'm sure you know it too. Like your local community, they don't want to just be liberal activists. They want to do it as Jews, and they go to Jewish organizations and they have elections and they pressure people
David, this
to be
this
black
reminds me of
as Jews.
years ago when I was doing radio and I had various religious leaders on my show to talk about what they believed in and what their religion was all about. And I had on a minister, a Unitarian Universalist minister, on the program. And I asked her, I said, is there any basic principles that Unitarianism believes in? I mean, and she said, oh, it's funny you should ask that. We're having a meeting next month where we're going to all get together and vote and decide what we believe in. Well, my point here is that that's not what Judaism is. We're not just going to get together and have votes to decide what we believe in. We have a tradition. Wait a minute, I'm not done. We have a tradition that goes back to when the Lord God, King of the universe, put his hand out from the cloud and handed Moses the entire Torah. We have a tradition that goes back to Abraham. There are principles in Judaism, and the main and central principle, as articulated, by the way, by Maimonides, who I agree is not completely accepted, but largely is that we believe in God. And we believe there is one God and there's no other God before God. And then from that, we believe in certain moral and ethical principles. This isn't something that's because I like it or don't like it, or you like it or don't like it. The fact is, it's not just, we don't just get up and have a vote and decide to, oh, we're going to support neutering children next year. That's not how Judaism works. It's not a democracy. It's a religion, and it's a ethno religion as well. But the point is that there is a tradition there that goes back to certain divine assumptions. We're supposed to know God and as such be a light unto the nations because of that, and because we uphold the moral and ethical principles. So, I get the fact that it may not be trendy with American Jews, and you're quite right, most of them are liberal, even though, as you say, that's slightly decreasing. But they need to ask themselves, they want to be liberal, fine, be liberal if they must. But if they're going to try to claim that they're speaking for Judaism, that is fraudulent. That's it's desecration. And again, I would also say that for ultra-Orthodox in some cases. They say, oh, Israel has nothing to do with Judaism. You have to look at the Torah. Look at Abraham being told by God, I'm going to show you, I want you to go to this land that I will show you. Look at the book of Deuteronomy, which lays out the exact borders of Israel, which is exactly where Israel is today. I get the fact they don't think it's holy enough, fine. You can have disagreements. But I think that the Torah that they seem to revere so much is completely saturated with this command to take possession of that tiny swath of land. If they want to claim that this isn't really Judaism, then they've got as big a problem as people who want to cut off the balls of young boys, and go give sermons on Yom Kippur about why this is a great thing. There are certain standards. There are certain things that I think Judaism does advocate that goes beyond what you and I believe in or what you and I think.
Yeah, but I think you're being disingenuous there. I'm saying that even if you're right on that, it's that, well, maybe Jonathan Greenblatt is not claiming to be a rabbi or speak on behalf of Judaism. He's claiming to speak on behalf of Jews, and he does speak on behalf of Jews and the majority of Jews. And you use the example of the Universal Unitarian minister. I use the example of my local Jews, the Jewish colleagues, the people who I went to synagogue with, who have voted against me overwhelmingly. God forbid. I felt the famous story of Ovadia Yosef, who was the chief rabbi in Egypt, and I have his art school biography, and he eventually ran for election, became chief rabbi, and very renowned in Israel. But when he was young, he was sent to be the chief rabbi of Egypt, and it was a largely secular business community before after, God forbid, 1967, when most of the Jews got expelled, but till 1967. And he tried to get them to get up to a kosher standard. And like I said, the rabbis on the March on Washington, he was like, that's not kosher. You got to do this stuff. It's the law. And they held an election, a referendum on Ovadia Yosef. And do you know the percentage? Like, just a guess of the percentage of Jews that voted to have him fired and get rid of him and chase him out of town.
Probably a pretty big number.
Over 90% of the Jews of Egypt voted to fire Ovadia Yosef and kick him out of town, saying, like, no, we do, like, these were Jews who were part of Jewish organization. This was organized.
Yeah, so I mean, we have always,
we don't want to do these kosher rules. We don't want you to tell us to do this stuff. We want to organize as Jews for these reasons. And they don't care. They fired Rabbi Yosef and sent him back to Israel. And that's, basically what happened to me. And saying, like, no, I mean, the Jews do vote. We vote constantly. The Reform organization that has over 1.5 million people that they represent, that say Jonathan Greenblatt is likely being pressured to speak up on these issues. They have regular polling. They send out members. They have issues.
No question.
Get voted up, and the leaders, that's what they want them to do. And so you say, okay, maybe it's not Judaism.
Well, what if they decide to vote that ham is kosher?
The majority of Jews do want their leaders to do.
What if they decide to vote and a majority decides that ham is now going to be kosher?
Well, the Reform did decide that.
Now, do you think is that consistent with Judaism? I know they did. I mean, the famous treifa banquet, but
that led to the rabbis. The rabbi march on FDR, where they turned him away at the White House, right?
Yeah, mainly because not because they were, they said, oh, they're troublemakers. It was because they were raising the actual issue of the Holocaust.
No,
that's what Rabbi Weiss, Stephen Weiss, did not want that mentioned because he thought it would embarrass Roosevelt.
I have his autobiography behind me. I looked into it, and no, because Rabbi Eliezer Silver, who was the leader of the march, had sued Rabbi Weiss close to 1,000 times.
Fine, but the point is that I get. Look at
so when the rabbi,
I understand that
this man who sued me over 1,000 times.
I get the fact that, look, we've always been a schismatic people that are, as the old saying goes, where there are 2 Jews, there are 3 synagogues, right? One for me, one for thee, and one that nobody goes to. I mean, that's been the nature of our people probably since day one. But the point, and I don't want to get into a rabbit hole with Stephen Weiss, other than to say, the head of the Reform movement, that part of the motivation with him was that he did not want the American Jewish community to talk about the Holocaust because he thought it would embarrass Roosevelt. Anyway, I want to go back to Elon Musk and the business of the ADL, which even, it has, the ADL casts the impression, whether they do so overtly or otherwise, that they represent Judaism, and they don't. That's my issue. They people look, oh, well, you want to know what the Jewish Jews believe in, what Jews are about? You look to the ADL. I mean, there was other groups as well, but they are pretty much the predominant one. Just like if you want to know what Catholics think, you'll look to the Catholic Conference of Bishops. It's kind of an imprimatur that they carry. And my point is that they have to be careful to differentiate between when they take a liberal position by saying, look, we are not taking this position because this represents Judaism per se. We're taking it because it represents individual and groups of Jews who happen to be liberal and who want to express a liberal opinion, so as not to give the impression that they are speaking and acting on behalf of Judaism. But they also have been gone very deeply into the issue of censorship. And when I say gotten into it, they're not the only ones. There are all these censorship mills at colleges now, like the Shorenstein Institute here at Harvard and some other elite colleges, who are studying how to label, quote, misinformation, unquote, and how to purge it from the public discourse. And I would say that, yes, there are certain standards. I was a radio host for years in the greater Boston area, and I observed FCC regulations, I understand that there are certain things that you do censor. You don't want to, that they actually do violate community standards. But the problem with groups like the ADL, and they're not the only ones, but we're speaking about them right now because they claim to represent Judaism, is that they have expanded the definition of misinformation and disinformation to include their own petty political enemies and their political discourse that they don't agree with, conservative discourse particularly. And that's a big problem because they've got a lot of influence, they have a lot of power, and it's a very dangerous phenomena. And it's one that I think could backfire on Jews.
Yeah, I think you keep on misspeaking, maybe purposely, and saying, no, they do not claim to represent Judaism.
Not openly, but they imply
claim to
it.
represent Jews.
Yeah, no,
and they do represent Jews. They, saying they do not represent Judaism.
No,
they represent Jews.
Yeah, but people look to them as the spokesperson for Judaism.
Well, maybe
when you
people,
think of,
but no, I don't think so. People,
and I don't think they've done anything to disabuse that.
Spokespeople for Jews, not Judaism. If
Well,
they wanted, I mean, there is no
look,
spokesperson.
David, I don't want to split hairs with you. I mean, my contention is, yes, it is, and my contention is that they allow that image to percolate that they do represent Judaism. But even if I'm not right about that, to even claim they represent Jews, no, they represent liberal Jews, and I don't care if that liberal Jews are a majority. That is still a very particular point of view. It is a very secular point of view by most of their own admission, and that they should be very clear about that they are not necessarily representing normative Judaism or normative Jewish values. They're representing liberal values that are embraced by Jews who, if you take a look at their general orientation, these are people who often don't really care that much about Jewish life, Jewish tradition, Jewish observance. They're not necessarily supporters of Israel. They're just not, you know what I mean? And they that's their right. They would openly say so. That's what the ADL is representing. And yeah, they do represent that.
You're being disingenuous because they say, like, no.
Disingenuous?
Because the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organization has 51 member organizations that they try to back each other for their conceived purpose, and the ADL is being the liaison for these representations, and the various organizations in the conference represent 4 to 5 million American Jews. Are you a member of any Jewish organization?
I'm a member of 2 synagogues.
And is your synagogue, you go to a conservative synagogue?
Yes, a conservative and an Orthodox.
Is it an independent or it's part of a national organization?
I think that they're both parts of national organizations. I haven't really paid that much attention to it.
I mean, they have election. Your local conservative synagogue probably has a yearly election and a board of directors.
Yeah.
And they hire the rabbi, and they probably are a member of the National Conservative or some organization.
Right.
And that organization is a member of the Conference of Presidents of major Jewish organizations. And so the fact is that, like, no, you're wrong. Though ADL speaks for you, and you just lost the election. Your local synagogue voted, and they voted for leadership, and that leadership voted to be part of this organization, and then that organization is part of the conference, and then they have committees and votes, and this is what they voted on. And you're just
all right, David. Look, I mean,
you did lose the election. You are a member of a Jewish organization that had an election that you lost, and this is what is. You're saying that no, I mean, unquestionably, the ADL represents Jews through democratic processes. I don't see how you could say anything else. You could say they don't represent.
No, I don't deny that. Look at David.
Jews and Jewish organizations are all democratic. They all have elections, and they have structures with boards that have elections and national committees. And like, I'm sure you definitely know this. Like, I know this. My mom's a lawyer. Like, Jews do elections. They do polling maybe more than close to anybody. And there's constantly elections and committees and board meetings and polling and things. And when it comes out that ADL does factually speak for the majority of American Jews through democratic processes.
And I don't deny that. I'm simply noting that they are doing the wrong thing when they allow the public to think that they actually speak, and any of these groups do, for Judaism itself. What?
Did you ever try running for like a board of directors at your local synagogue?
I don't really care about their boards. I am
Well, as
saying
you
that
allude,
this entire structure is corrupt.
well, how is it
They
corrupt if it's
represent.
democratic?
I don't care if it's democratic. Judaism is a religion. It's not a democracy.
Yeah, but
You
we're
know,
not talking about the religion. We're talking
I'm
about,
talking about the
I
religion.
mean, the
I'm
purpose of
talking
the
about
conference of
God.
the ADL is not to speak for Judaism, it's to speak for
It
the Jews.
allows the public to think, and the non-Jewish public, by the way,
That
to
Dwight
think that they
Eisenhower
do.
did not ask for a consensus opinion about what Judaism he wanted when the conference was created. Eisenhower did not ask for a consensus opinion about Judaism. He wanted a consensus opinion about what Jews think.
Right, I get that. And my point is that what Jews think is not consistent in this regard to Judaism. You know, I mean, what if the Jews decided that they wanted to declare that we don't believe in God anymore, that we don't believe in kosher anymore?
Well, we did
As you
declare.
said, yeah,
I mean,
and
even Israel
now do
declared
you
that. That's
think
the same debate in Israel right now. Oh, but I mean, Israel, the demographics are different, but it's the same thing with the Supreme Court in Israel right now. And it's about the question of, does Israel represent Jews or Judaism? And do Jews have the right to democratically overrule the Torah? And that's like
probably
the Supreme Court.
I think probably not. You know, I mean, it's the only God overrules the Torah. I mean, that's you don't just simply. There's never been a point in our history from the day that Adam and Eve took the bite of the apple up till today that you've had the Jews overruling the Torah. Now
But
maybe
you're
they learned.
preaching now to an extent to saying like, no, I mean, that's reform. I said like, my grandfather's grandfather was reform and they decided that this stuff is not true. However, we still want to organize and get together in synagogue as Jews, even though we think our religion is not actually factually true.
Well,
And so I mean, I
you can
understand that
think.
you're against it, but to say
No,
like
no, no,
we
David.
lost
You
the
can think
election,
that. You can think that, but you don't have a right to then step in, even if it's a majority, and declare publicly that Judaism is not true. Now, you personally may not believe in it. I don't know why you continue to at the shul. Maybe you like bagels and lox. I don't know.
no, and I'm talking
But
about my grandfather's grandfather's, like the history of reform. When the reform came out in Germany, they voted on a few things, and one of the things they voted on was that the Torah is not from God to Moses. That was a critical position of
right,
reform, but
look,
they didn't vote to disband as Jews. They just voted that the Torah is not true.
I
And
get it. They
that
can look. They can
continues
vote
to be the
away. They
largest
can
group of Americans.
but they can vote as much as they want. I'm glad they value voting. I wonder why they don't look into the 2020 election, but let's not go there. The point is that if they want to vote that ham is kosher, they want to vote anything they want, then they can have a vote.
They
Doesn't
did.
make
They
it
already did.
true.
They already did.
You're right, but that doesn't make it so. I mean, should a Catholic Church decide that Jesus is not the Lord and Savior? I mean, it doesn't. And there are Christian groups that are doing this. Unitarians do it. That doesn't mean that that's the Christian understanding. I mean, it may be the people who call themselves Christian, they think this. These guys in the synagogue who say, oh, we're no longer going to believe in God. You're right. I mean, the Reconstructionist movement, for example, they actually, I think part of their charter is that they don't believe in God. I mean, or they've replaced God with a Spinoza type pantheism where they believe in nature and they worship, which is completely the opposite of the Torah, and it's certainly the opposite of interpretations of the Torah up until that point. It's a
I don't
complete
disagree with you
deviation.
at all this, and that was the main point I was coming up to defend the ADL because, like, I mean, if you're going to say that atheism is nefarious or, in not keeping kosher or even like abortion or LGBT or the liberal values is nefarious, but I was largely coming to the point to defend the ADL to say the ADL does factually represent the majority of American Jews, and they do that actually through democratic processes. And whether the
Right.
majority of
And
American
they
Jews
should
are
stay
wrong,
out of issues
if
that
you
are
want to say
not
the
Jewish
majority of
issues.
American Jews are wrong, I'm going to agree with you on that. But I don't think the majority of American Jews are nefarious. I just think they're wrong. But I do think that the ADL does represent the majority of American Jews, and they don't do it
And they
through
should
like
stay
reverse
out of
methods. They
the
do it
ADL
through
should stay
democratic
out of these
processes.
issues. They should stay out. They should
How
focus
can
on
they
their
stay out of the issues when the majority of American Jews are voting
because
and giving
they
money to
should
do
tell the
exactly what they're
majority of
doing?
American they should tell the majority of American Jews to take their radical left wing ideas elsewhere, and if they want to call themselves Jews, let them. But the official Jewish establishment should stay out of these issues because they don't actually represent Judaism.
Well,
They
I've been
don't,
involved in
there's nothing
internal.
in Judaism that allows for elective abortion on demand, and for them to allow the American public and the non-Jewish American public to think that is what's fueling anti-Semitism. Now, if Jews want to believe that, that's their business. Let them do it. Let them. Yeah, but my problem again is when they try to wrap themselves in a Jewish flag and say, "Oh, this is Judaism." They're wrong. I don't care if they vote for it. They can vote, as we said. You pointed out yourself. There was a reform. The reform, by the way, is more religious today than it was. They no longer believe kosher, ham is kosher. That was late 19th century. There was a radical shift in reformism. I think that they've moved back to a
They do
bit
believe
more.
in the LGBT, transgender, and abortion stuff.
They do. The reform movement.
Let me put a question to you, because rather than going on the circle and you kind of moralizing, because I mean, to me, like my opinions
I'm
on
not
morality, if
moralizing.
you're
I
a
believe in this stuff.
politician,
But I'm talking about Judaism.
I mean, like in Boston, it probably even more so, but like, or in Metro Detroit, like if you have 250,000 Jews in Boston, you're a politician, and you see there's an Orthodox community that represents like a 10%, and they're geographically confined to a small area. And then you have another 50%, like your federation, your organized non-Orthodox Jewry that represents at this point probably about half of Judaism, because like the federation, the conference system basically represents the whole conservative, reform, progressive, even reconstructionist, even like the organizations like Hadassah or whatever, they're all part of the federation system and the ADL, and they have their elections. So if you're an elected official, I mean, what, like in Eisenhower's position, and you're just like, okay, like, even like a non-Jew who might agree with you. Like, I don't know, but saying like, I know these are Jews, and I know they're organized as Jews, and I know this is what they're telling me. And like in my district, because I'm in the same district as the Orthodox Jews were from my mother's district. Like where Haley Stevens versus Andy Levin, who lost. But I mean, my mother's district has almost zero Orthodox Jews, but it has about 50,000 Jews, and of those 50,000 Jews, probably half of them are members of Federation. Maybe probably even 60-70% are members of Federation. Organized leftist groups, and they petition and organize politicians, and they tell Haley Stevens, I'm even friends on Facebook with the woman who was president of the federation and makes the meetings with Haley Stevens, and she, through elected democratic process, the federation had a vote and she won, and she tells Haley Stevens the issues that are important to the Jewish community. And I'm sure it's the exact same in Boston. I'm sure there's a federation, and it's probably, like in Metro Detroit, maybe it's a woman who pushes the LGBT and trans and abortion. And when she speaks to Ayanna Pressley or whoever your congresswoman is, she tells, Mrs. Pressley, these are the issues that the Jewish community is concerned with: abortion, trans, LGBT. And you'd be like,
By the way, I don't know if a majority of Jews are down with that. Anyways, I think that it's the leadership that certainly is, and there's a certain good number that are. But look, what that tells me is what we both have said, and it's obvious that American Judaism is, or Jews, I should say, are very liberal. I mean, that's just a fact. But
did any Jewish organization back you over Barney Frank? God forbid. I mean, I would guess that probably every single Jewish organization probably backed Barney Frank.
Yeah, because they're liberals.
Because that's what Jews. But I'm saying because that was what Jews felt like. Jews.
Yeah, because the Jews. I mean, this is obvious of it. The Jews have become very liberal. I think, particularly since the 1950s. I don't think they necessarily were before that. I think that there was a shift. I mean, I'm getting into, I don't want to go into it, but you and I have talked in the past about what I consider to have been a subversion of a large portion of Judaism as a result of the Sabbatean and Frankist movements. But, the point is that Judaism has been moved in the leftist camp. There's no question about that. That doesn't mean that, again, that is Judaism. I mean, that is Jewish people in America. By the way, I don't know if it's so true with Jewish people in other countries. We're talking American Judaism here. And yeah, they are definitely overwhelmingly liberal, although I think that might be changing slightly. That doesn't mean that they're right about their Jewish faith. They're right about liberalism and socialism and Satanism and communism or whatever the hell else they're into. but they're not they don't have it right. Even if they vote that Judaism should do all these things,
Well,
they
because we got
should.
to get back to
And
the main issue that
I would all I would say, because we're reaching toward the end of the show, is that they need to express their radical opinions by joining groups of like-minded people who could be Jews or non-Jews, and not claim that they're speaking for Judaism. And I would address my non-Jewish audience and tell them this is not, they do not, they may be liberal Jews. That does not represent the Jewish covenant and the Jewish tradition. And that, for them to say they do is wrong. They are liberals, and you could point to liberals have infiltrated Christian churches as well. Look at the National Council of Churches, very left wing Protestant group. Even Catholicism has been somewhat subverted, particularly by this present Pope. That doesn't mean that it's normative Christianity, and it's also not normative Judaism. It is simply a trend that has taken over, and that to an extent it has taken a large portion of the high ground in Jewish culture. And again, I would just note, particularly to my non-Jewish friends, that most of these liberal Jews who are pushing these agendas are not predisposed toward Jewish practice. They're not predisposed toward Jewish belief in God, and they're not predisposed toward Jewish life. They use Judaism as a political football to push their radical, actually antithetical agenda. Antithetical, that is, to Judaism and to the Jewish covenant between God and Moses. Anyway, David, what else are you working on these days?
well, mostly research. I mean, we didn't get to the important, what we were supposed to talk about because we're going on circles about Jews versus Judaism and the dynamics.
We talk about the ADL.
But because I don't disagree with any of the points you're making, but I think you're being disingenuous to keep on focusing on Judaism. We're talking politics, politicians. It doesn't matter. They're
Well,
not
I'm
here
making
to
the point
fight
that
for
the
the true
ADL is
Judaism. They're trying to represent Jews, and this is what Jews feel and believe. And there might be
right.
a
We've talked about that.
Orthodox community, so that
Yeah,
there
the
might be
Jews are liberal. We've talked about that. I mean,
in
that's
my
exactly
area,
right.
some of the biggest cross-communal events were ADL events, and the reason why so many people came to them because it was related to anti-Semitic events, and law enforcement was there, and
And that's their proper role, by the way. As I said earlier, that's the lane that they should stick to. Actual threats to Jewish individuals by anti-Semites. If they had stuck to that role, that's fine. And if they'd stuck to support of Israel, that's fine too. But the problem is they've gone off their own track. They are now focusing on Democratic Party politics and left-wing agendas that have nothing to do with Judaism. They may be popular amongst liberal Jews, and they may all sit together and feel a sense of reinforcement. Gee, this really is Judaism. We want to give hysterectomies to prepubescent girls. That's what Judaism is, because we're going to vote for it and say it's right. And they have a kind of this reinforcement. But that doesn't make it so. Anyway, David, do you have any videos coming up?
I might do another Ask the Rabbi. I've been reading the history of the, but let's talk about Elon Musk for a second. And
Sure.
I was almost on this Mario Nuffel show, who actually had Elon Musk on. This guy, a businessman from Dubai in Australia, who had these big podcasts, and he had Keith Woods and Lucas Gage, and I mean, he never heard of the ADL, and then he came and he was, that's why I was going to come and defend the ADL, because he couldn't find anyone to. He had all these right-wing Jews and Israeli Jews that were just basically saying what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But I
I'm
break
glad to
it
know
down
that.
to say you have non-Orthodox Jewish American life, what the conference represents, maybe 50-60% of American Jews. You have Orthodox groups that have their own organization, maybe 10 to 20% of American Jews, and they're mostly localized to just a few major cities. And then you have another, the largest growing percentage is actually unaffiliated, Jews that maybe now could be 20-30%. And I would guess, so I say two things. So when you're talking about speaking on behalf of Jews, so basically you have organized Jewish life like the ADL that speaks on behalf of Jews. Then you have rabbis and Orthodox organizations. And then you have independent Jews who are popular. So very rarely, most Jewish organizations focus on dealing with elites. However, most of the Jews that are popular, from my perspective, are individual Jews. That you talk like, who do you know as a Jew that's popular with the masses? Most of the Jews who are popular with the masses are independent Jews. And so if you're looking at someone like Elon Musk, and that could be in the business community, it could be entertainment, writing, sports. The vast majority of the Jews that most people have heard of are unaffiliated. So Elon Musk, like like in his biography, all his business partners, not all of it. I mean, saying every single one of his companies from the beginning has had major business partners. With he's always had Jewish friends. Most of his Jewish friends are completely unaffiliated. They don't put any value into Jewish tradition. Like Elon Musk, his favorite books, when Netanyahu, he asked him, he mentioned science fiction books. Elon Musk is, given his opinions about, the Bible as mythology. And my guess is almost all of Elon Musk's Jewish friends and business advisors, technology people, Israelis, probably agree with him that, they just don't consider Judaism true, and they might, have a Jewish identity. And I think Elon Musk is going to have enough backers from unaffiliated Jews that he knows, like, look, he has hundreds of Jews that work for him. He has hundreds of Jewish friends, Jews that he admires and respect, and they're going to back him. Like, look,
Good.
and
He's
then
going to need it.
Netanyahu, the right wing Israelis, saying like,
Good.
I
He's
was
going to
actually
need them.
that a lot of, Elon Musk fired like 80% of the Twitter staff, and he actually replaced a significant amount of them with Israeli companies. That, it's like 80% wasted staff, and he was able to, not all of them Israeli, but he was able to hire a handful of small Israeli companies that were able to replace the dead weight of the former Twitter staff. And so it's going to be interesting. These cultural battles like Netanyahu, the coalition, the bail reform, the same issues that you're saying is the same argument in Israel against the Supreme Court. And
well, that's another subject for another day.
Demographics are different in Israel. I mean,
yeah, we should talk about that. But I just want to wrap it up by saying that there is one reason and one reason only why groups like the leftist groups like the ADL and other leftist groups, both non and so-called Jewish, why they are trying to take out Elon Musk. And that is because he appears to be, I think he is to a certain extent, standing up for the thing that they despise the most, and that is free speech. They are the only reason he's standing. When he took over Twitter, he ended this fascist regime over there that had taken down President Trump and his 20 million Twitter followers, and expunged and purged from Twitter tweets and sites and comments that didn't goose step and zig heil to the left. And Elon Musk came around and he undid a fairly big portion of that, not entirely. And that's why they despise him. He wants free speech.
Like
he wants an open and dialogue. He wants fair debate. And he wants other elements of freedom that used to be something that you think the left embraced. They never did. They claim to. But that overall represent the American way. What did you say?
But you think that it's, I'm saying that I don't think there's anything nefarious or demonic about the ADL or the majority of American
I
Jews.
think there's something demonic about censorship of opinions. That's what Adolf Hitler did. Yeah, that's demonic. That is Satan in the very embodiment of it. To try to goose step and march only to one narrow view and not allow dissent, reasonable dissent. Yeah, that's Satan. That's what I do say. Anyway, David, listen, I got to run. I got to run.
The Jews are scared, and you'll favor censorship and not demonic or nefarious. People are
just if it's censoring, look, there are things that should be censored. You and I could name a few things that probably should be, But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the squelching of independent and conservative opinion. That's what I'm talking about, and that's what they hate. That's
Yeah,
why they
that's
hate
corruption
Musk.
level. I mean, saying once these organizations have that power that they use it on a corrupt level. But I think the majority
Yes, indeed.
of Jews and even most ADL people, even maybe Jonathan Greenblatt himself, are yeah, it'd be defensive. I don't think there's anything nefarious that they just think they're wrong.
That they're trying to censor Twitter, and that's why they're trying to take out Elon Musk. That is nefarious. It's wrong, and it's ugly, and it should not be something certainly that falls under the imprimatur of Judaism. Anyway, David, listen, great talking to you again, and we'll do it again sometime.
Okay, yeah, we'll see what happens, and it could be that if this continues, the floodgates might open back up if the ADL takes a big loss, and
I hope that Musk puts them right out of business.
well,
And maybe we can start again with a group that
I
actually
mean, just to
focuses
mention,
on
like,
real anti-Semitism
I mean,
and,
they're
and
probably going to
support of
double
Israel.
down. They're probably going to try legislation. They might try Garland.
Oh, I'm
Attorney
sure they're going to
General.
try to
They're already
march out
doing it.
the entire police
I mean,
state.
the battle will
Oh,
probably
it's going to
go
get and
on.
it's going to get ugly, and that's why I think Musk is a man who is the man of the moment, standing up not only against them but against this entire Nazi infrastructure that is creeping, slowly encroaching on all America and on the
Yeah.
world.
Well, we'll see.
Anyway,
So
David, I really have to
Jewish
run.
holidays, be sealed into the book of life for positive
Thank
things,
you,
and
and
God
as you as
bless the
well.
world positively.
Lashana Tova,
Thanks for reaching
Lashana
out,
Tova Tika Tevu. Yeah, you bet.
and you
Okay.
too. Thanks a lot. God bless.